Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome back to Inspected Goals, episode 1 for the new season, where we try and improve our FPL play through an analytical approach. I suppose first things first, you might be wondering, why is Sam much less handsome and accent is different? Sam has decided to take a step back. I suppose this season, much more important things going on than FPL, and I've kind of, entered the fray here. A lot of you might be wondering who I am. My name's Adam. I suppose you might have seen me as Swish M8 on Twitter, or in some of the analytical circles, as Swish on Discord and things like that. I suppose myself and Luke here, and Ben and Seb, and hopefully some guests along the way throughout the season, we'll kind of just chat FPL, try and see how we use analytics and how we use data to, I suppose, enhance our play. I suppose that's enough about me. Nobody really cares about me here. It's more so about getting ready for the new season. So, Luke, been a while. How are you feeling? You enjoyed the time off, and how are you finding pre-season and planning going into the game week 1?
Yeah, it's been great having the time off. Obviously, quite an extended period of time off for Inspected Goals, because we kind of finished almost halfway through last season, to be honest with you. But like you said, other things going on for some people. But I'm keen to get it back started, and we had to get a new host to do that. So welcome, Adam. Thank you for taking the mantle. I had it planned the other way, where I was going to actually abuse Sam and say that you were more handsome. I think most people agree. If we want to set up a poll for that later, we can do that. I've enjoyed the break, mate. I watched obviously all the Euros. Who wouldn't? Actually, were Ireland at? No, we won't go there. I watched that. Didn't really. I set up a team for the Euros, but I think I stopped after literally the second group stage because I just couldn't be bothered with it, to be honest. And as usual, though, as soon as FPL came back, doing the overthinking, the planning, the tinkering, because it's just always been my nature. I know it is largely very pointless. But I did that. It has lessened over the years. Like, I don't do it as much as I did. So I've been in that mode, really, just sort of playing around. Obviously, then when review drops, that helps me, and I've been doing various bits and pieces there. Definitely haven't done it to death yet. I think, as is discussed in the analytical chat and just between us and everyone else, we're still quite a way off, aren't we? There's still a lot that we need to know. So it's just recognising that, although I enjoy this period, it is still quite largely pointless, and we have to wait a little bit before we start really knuckling down. But it doesn't hurt, right? It doesn't hurt. We all enjoy we're all here because we like the hobby, and it's good to get our thoughts and opinions out there and check on it. So, the biggest sort of bombshell, I guess, for FPL was the fact that the game's actually changed slightly. So we haven't talked about that. Some new rules to deal with. What are your thoughts and feelings on those?
Yeah, so I suppose the biggest changes, of course, are 5 free transfers, and with that as well, the fact that they can roll through a wildcard, which I think is massive. And then we obviously have a new chip coming into the game. Unfortunately, we don't know what that is, and we won't for 5 months. But before we get into, I suppose, the nitty gritty of it, I suppose I do think it's important to say it's great that, I suppose, FPL are trying to improve the game. With new rules and things like that. I think the free transfer change is excellent. I suppose from my point of view, it's great for me. I've always been somebody, and we'll get into strategies and things like that later, but I've always been somebody who kind of doesn't use that many transfers anyways, so the fact that I'll be able to roll more now is great for me. But also, I think from FPL's point of view, from an engagement point of view with the game, I think probably one of the big factors was, I guess, somebody who maybe builds a team for game week 1, sorry, I'm just looking at a message in the chat there. Somebody, it sound in one ear but not the other. Is anybody else having the same issue, or is that just Rory?
Is this a skill issue? He said. Knowing Rory, it could be a skill issue. Yeah. But anyone else in the chat, tell us if the sound is wonky.
Yeah. But I suppose with that, anyways, from an engagement point of view, maybe a casual player who doesn't really take FPL too seriously, they might build a team for game week 1, forget about it, come back in a month's time and have a bunch of transfers to catch back up. and not be you having to take lots of hits. So I think it's great all around from that point of view. The mystery chip, I mean, a new chip, cool. Not knowing what it is, not so cool. Sound all good, gents. So yes, it is a Rory skill issue, as you said, Luke, which doesn't surprise anybody in here who knows Rory and yeah.
His tendencies.
So yeah, I think excellent change. Really, really looking forward to it. I think it's actually a really, really good problem from, I suppose, an analytical point of view. How we kind of approach that. In the past, having one or two free transfers usually are kind of our free transfer value. I suppose if we get into that in whether you use review or any sort of solver, the value that you place on a transfer, in my opinion, has now changed massively. Luke in both ears, swish one only. Okay, so it does seem to be just not a Rory issue, it's actually an Adaming issue.
Alright, well when I start talking, maybe just have a play around for a bit in the background.
Go ahead. So I'll let you take over for a second, and I'll have a fiddle around with that.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you've said. I think personally for me it will be a challenge to try and save those 5 transfers. I think last year I ended up with some of the highest value going because my tendency has always been to use them and react, and that's actually been my biggest problem, especially in like my banter years where I didn't really care and was taking hits left, right and centre. Being patient is not my strong suit, and it's something I have to really work on. So having the 5 transfers, the plan is to always get there. Will I ever get there? I guess we'll see. So in my mind it really strengthens better players than me, which is probably not ideal for myself, and arguably strengthens worse players because they can sort of log off and come back. I mean, I shouldn't really be competing with those worse players, but we all know the amount of variance that exists in this game. There's a chance that a few of them do just beat me if I pretty much logging in every sort of 4 weeks rather than the amount of time I spend but there we go. I think you've got a meme somewhere, haven't you, to reflect that you could bring up on our screen at some point. I think that another point you raised there, though, about the free transfer value, that is something that has caused some interest. Because, like before, I know there was lots of hard work that went into it, getting this value, sort of around the 1.75 mark, basically. Now, the free transfer value is quite flexible, isn't it? In the sense that it's a lot more valuable early on in the process and less so further on. So the value kind of changes. A free transfer value between, say, saving between 3 and 4 and 4 and 5 is much less than it is at the very beginning. So it's harder to calculate, I guess, certainly for me. So yeah, we'll see how that works. But I think it's a good change overall. The mystery chip, that's a nonsense, isn't it? That's an absolute nonsense, but I guess we'll see what happens there. I can't imagine it's something that's going to break the game in the sense that we're like, oh my god, I wish you told me this earlier because I could have planned or done something to it. I hope it's not that, but what can we do anyway? We can't do anything about that, so we'll see where it goes. You think you solved your sound issues?
I think so. Sorry about that. I think so. Let me know, guys, if that sounds a little bit better. Yeah, I think we're good. I've brought up our sorry about that. I was just trying to fix the sound issues, but it seems to be okay. I'll just give it a second to make sure we're all good. While those of you who are waiting for that, you can have a look at this meme, as Luke mentioned, around, I suppose, who the new changes benefit and who's going to be happy about that. Just poking fun. It's all just a bit of fun. But yeah, I think, as I mentioned, those players who were much more casual, like incredibly casual, benefits them massively because they can come back. And then those who, as Luke mentioned, I suppose really engage with the game and play, particularly I suppose from an analytical point of view and using solvers and things like that. Transfers are not really used as much as, or needed as much as you might think if you build a team that is robust. I suppose from my point of view, I suppose the reason I was so happy with the change is I've nearly always played the game in this way. This actually won't really change the way that I play. I've always built a really deep squad with a deep bench. Last season I had a 15-man squad and rarely used transfers in the first 2 months of the season. Oftentimes it was just make a small change and roll the other transfer and just keep going with that. Whereas now, I'm not just going to... The CEO in October is is a bit of a joke, I suppose, and in jest, but that will be the plan. I mean, will that happen? Probably not. Somebody will get injured, something will change, almost definitely, as it always does, but the plan will be to build a team that's set to do that. And when using solvers and things like that around free transfer value, I think I was just talking about that before I went to fix the sound. I think the biggest change for those of you who are really into using solvers and things like that is our free transfer value now. The way I see it anyways is it's no longer linear. So in the past we'd say, whatever the value is, 1.5, 1.7, 2, whatever that is, the way that we value a transfer, that's what your value is, regardless really of anything. Whereas now the number of transfers that you already have is going to impact how valuable it is to save a transfer. So from my point of view in this season, and with being able to roll up to 5, I think getting yourself to a situation where you have maybe 3 free transfers saved is incredibly important. I think beyond that, that's kind of a nice area to be in, where you have 3 free transfers and you maybe use 1, use 2, and continue rolling transfers here and there. That's going to be kind of, I think, the most important thing. So for me, when I'm using a solver, when I have one, say my game week 1 free transfer value will be very, very high. Exactly what value, I don't really know, to be fair. Maybe 2.2, 2.3, maybe as high as 2.5. I think it's really, really important to try and roll game week 1, is what I'm trying to say. Game week 2, I think very important as well, but maybe slightly less so. And then game week 3, presuming things go well and my team doesn't get injured or sent off or something, my free transfer value decreases each week as we go through, depending on how many I have. And yeah, I think that's where I'm coming from and where I'm going to be approaching things a little bit. I think it's a really nice change, and really excited to kind of get into it. I suppose with it being so early and still being pre-season and things like that, I haven't solved an enormous amount yet, but I have been thinking kind of around the general strategy, and I'm happy because it kind of suits the way that I've always played the game.
Yeah, and ultimately I think the more complexity you add to the game, which it is now more complex with the sense that you can roll these free transfers through chips, which is something that we'll have to get a head around, they lend themselves to using a solver, right? Using a model. It's harder for the human to comprehend and certainly change their patterns of thinking that might be embedded for 10, 15 years. I've always had it where I'm aiming to a point in FPL, and it doesn't change too much in the sense that we might be aiming for a wildcard at a certain point, at least planning to. It'll still be partly there, but the point is the chips sort of don't cut you off anymore as much. So it'll be strange, but yeah, looking forward to it. I think people are saying the sound's a little bit low, but don't worry if you can't get it any higher.
Yeah,
you just have to shout louder.
Yeah, I think I'm slightly echoing through. I think it's coming through your sound back to me, and that it's picking it up through your mic maybe. Okay. So maybe just turn me down a small bit on your end where you're hearing me from, if you can. That might help. But yeah.
I should do that.
And yeah, I'll just speak up a small bit. A question there in the chat around the 5th transfer will be super low in value. 100%, yeah. If you get to a stage where you have 4 or 5 free transfers, yeah. The 5th one itself, the free transfer value would be tiny, right? Because you have to use it. You're not going to burn a transfer anyways. Like realistically, when you get to 5, I think, particularly looking at a few solves so far, I know around game week 6, there's a couple of swings in fixtures and things like that. And in the solves that I've run, it does tend to actually quite like using transfers in game week 6. I think that could be, I suppose, a result of 2 things. 1, the fixtures change and there's EV to be grabbed from game week 6 onwards. But 2, and just something to be cautious of, maybe anybody using review, for example, the default solve depth tends to be 6. So in that sense, sure, you might, because on review at the moment our free transfer value is linear, right? Maybe the default I think is 1.75, maybe you've changed it, but whatever that is, once you've often most of the solves so far are saving the first 5 free transfers, and then once it gets to the last week in your horizon, in your solve depth, so what that is I suppose how many weeks the solver will actually consider using a transfer. So it's almost kind of like a dead end. Even if your horizon is 12 weeks, once you've saved 5 free transfers and there's 1 week left where the solver can use transfers, it's quite likely to use some. So just something to be cautious of. I think it does quite like using them anyways, even with an increased solve depth. But just a general thing just to be conscious of.
I still think it's going to be really difficult for the average manager and even the average analytical manager to be sat in a position where you're on, say, three free transfers, and just as argument's sake, you got Saka. I think if you start with Saka, game week 4, 5, 6 are a little bit worse than the first 3. I mean, I think it's game week 4 where he plays Spurs. I think you could arguably keep him for that, but then after that, he's like away to Man City, and then come back 6 is actually pretty good, but maybe you're looking to wildcard in 6, right? Yeah. So to get to that position, let's say you've been lucky enough, because you have to be lucky enough, even with a robust squad, to get to the point where you've got sort of 2, 3 free transfers available, and then you're sat there and it's like, Saka's playing Spurs and then City, can I not change him to someone like... You still have to have that restraint, but ultimately it's going to come down to, like you say, is the EV there? That's all that really matters for that transfer, right? You depending on I know the values we won't have exactly, and everyone will have a slight preference there, but I think that's where we might see some moments where people go, do you know what, it's gone well enough, I've got 3 free transfers, the EV's there to take Saka out and bring someone else. I don't know why I'm using Saka, because his EV remains high in just about every game, but you get my point.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I do think, I think it's important to stress, and this includes me and any other managers in both that are just very engaged with the game, I suppose. I think an overwhelming majority of players won't see more than 3 free transfers at any point throughout the season. I think for the absolute vast majority of FPL players, the game hasn't changed really at all until we see what the new chip is, I suppose. That will change things. But really, I don't think it's going to change much at all. Like, again, the meme here, it's in jest, but I suppose it does happen, right? Game week 1, somebody scores a few goals, and then people say, oh, well, maybe I want to buy him. Or you get an injury, and then you actually might need to make a transfer. I suppose when I mentioned about a robust squad, the idea is that hopefully that could cover you in case of an injury, where you might have a deeper bench or something for somebody to rotate in. And yeah, around kind of swings like that, Saka maybe I think in game week 5 in particular, Son is I suppose clear as like the best captain, and that's going to be a moment where people who start with Saka might be tempted to make that change, and to be honest, it might end up being a really good move to make. And yeah, I think that's going to be fine. And again, as you mentioned at the end, I suppose if the EV is there when it comes to it, then happy days, and we go with it. I suppose it is a game of patience, and I suppose the people who kind of play analytically, yes, we use a solver, yes, we use data, and we have X points projections and things like that, but really, to be honest, from my point of view, it's more of just a style of play for the most part, and a kind of way of thinking about the game, that the good players are always good. It doesn't matter if they haven't scored in a couple of weeks, it doesn't matter if they've scored 6 every week for the last 3 weeks, they're still good players. Salah's going to be good, Saka's going to be good. In game week 5 we are going to want Son. In game week 6 we are going to want Saka. We know that now, regardless of what happens between now and then. So I think, yes, like I say, we use a solver and things like that, but really it's more so just kind of coming up with a plan now that we're willing to stick through. I suppose vaguely things change, of course, and we have to kind of adapt and react through that, but it's more so it's come up a lot. I know I listened to a pod, the Who Got the Assist pod, I think last night or the night before, and Simon was on there, and he mentioned, and I think it comes from Dilksy originally, that it's paths and not really players. These players are all good, right? We know they are. But I suppose it's more so how do we fit them all into a longer term kind of strategy that's flexible, and being flexible to react to injuries or changes in team strength, or
I'm just going to shut my window while you're talking.
No problems. Team strength, or I suppose it's just so many things that we don't know. Games get called off all of a sudden and we have to react to that. I suppose just being flexible in that. So yeah, I think that's where I'm at. I might throw up just a couple of drafts here, if you're okay with that, Luke. If you've nothing else really to add just yet on the free transfers.
No, all good. Let's go through some drafts. I think these are. Have they got any plans in terms of when we might wildcard? Because I think that heavily influences drafts, doesn't it?
I suppose, yeah, good point. And something we should really mention. I might ask you first. I suppose personally, have you got a wildcard timing just yet that you're kind of looking to or planning toward?
Yeah, I mean, I've always looked to wildcard early. I've just always, whether it's the right play or not, and some seasons it's done me very well, some seasons it's not. But I just find it easier, and I think maybe it's a hangover from playing the Sky game where we actually had a forced wild card for a number of seasons anyway, which meant that you had to use it early in a particular game week. But it just makes it easier for me, for my small feeble mind, to break it down to I am focusing on this small section to begin with. And I think early season is where you could say probably the game is at some of its most volatile in the sense of expected minutes of players, new managers, blah blah blah. I could go on. There's lots of variables that aren't quite as known as later on. So to me, focusing on a shorter window has always kind of helped me in the game, and that's at the moment I sort of looked at game week 6 just and 7 just because I felt that was where the first obvious fixture swing seemed, and it seemed a little bit longer than this is too soon, just instinctively. But I'd argue, I've kind of gone along with what people are saying there a little bit. And then I haven't really looked at too much else, really. So recently, people have been mentioning this game week 4 wildcard. I haven't really looked at that, but I've heard some of the benefits of it. I mean, the fact that the transfer window shuts around that time, I think. You got an international break around that time. You're probably going to have a lot of the players from the Euros are probably back up to full fitness and starting again. So I think there is definitely some merit, and I do like the sound of it. So that's something I will check out. But for the moment, I'm kind of on like a 6 or 7. I mean, so much can change between now and then, right? If we get injuries to certain players that mean that that doesn't look as attractive, then I'll obviously change and look what else I can do. But yeah, how about you? Have you got any window yet? I think you mentioned maybe you were looking for longer term.
Yeah. Generally for me, I suppose you could see it as quite passive. I'll likely not wildcard until I need to. I'll probably be planning to wildcard, 17, game week 17, 18, 19. Regardless of whether or not there's a fixture swing or something like that. I think I mentioned flexibility earlier, and I think that's kind of how I'll approach the game. I mean, I've seen some of the game week, 6, 7 wildcard teams and things like that. There might be 1 or 2 players slightly different. There might be a small bit of EV that I could grab in the first 6 or 7 weeks. And that if I choose to build a team that isn't set for a wildcard 6 or 7, and I end up wildcarding in 6 or 7, there'll be some EV there that I've kind of bled over the first, month and a half of the season, which would be frustrating when we get there. But as of now, I suppose what I'll be doing is building to wildcard, as late as possible. I think also the fact that there is a chip that we have no idea what it does, and we won't find out what it does for a few months. Yeah,
that's a good point, and it could have an influence at the end of the day.
I would much rather wildcard after finding out what that does than before, if at all possible. I don't really want to be in a situation where at the end of December week 20th of December we find out this is the new chip, this is what it does, and maybe it could be, it could involve some really weird planning. It might not, but it might.
That also put me. I mean, I did for the first time ever entertain, because obviously we're very likely to have much less double game weeks this year. Entertain the idea of the game week 1 bench boost. Never really been a fan, just thinking you can get some stuff wrong. Some players might not turn up that you expect. But this year I have kind of thought, well, maybe I'd be open to it. But then with that chip lurking, I think it just gives me the excuse to bottle that and not do it, just in case it has a factor. I can't really see how it will have a factor, but I guess it might. We just don't know.
I think of a number of people anyways who are delighted to hear the bench boost 1 klaxon.
I mean, it goes well with the early wildcard situation as well, right? I think. I mean, I haven't looked at the wildcard 14, but I imagine you could build a pretty damn strong team and bench boost. Maybe not even game week 1. I think we've got enough cheapies that might still be playing by 2, 3, 4. I think there was another week I looked at my bench looked already really good, and I was thinking, damn, if I just had a playable goalkeeper here, I could consider bench boosting. I can't remember what week it is now. You guys probably know, like 3, 4, 5. One of them, it looks really good. So I was like, but I think that's a pipe dream to think I'll be in that position by then.
Yeah. I'll leave that to 11FI to hype up and the rest of the bench.
Is he going to play this year? I saw him put on Twitter that he's not going to play. Please tell me he was joking, because he didn't even respond.
Really? Yeah, hopefully. I don't know. Hopefully.
Yeah, he does way too much good work to not play. What's wrong 100%. With that?
So yeah, I think that's that from my point of view anyways. I'll be, planning for the long term, but with a team that is flexible to wildcard in 6 or 7 if needed. And without bleeding too much EV, but willing to sacrifice a little bit to be more flexible. And in the long run, that kind of seems to work out okay, and has in the past. I did similar last season, planned again without a wildcard in mind. I ended up wildcarding, I can't remember, game week 8 or something like that, just after the double game week that happened. And yeah, you do bleed a little bit of EV in the short term, but you're more flexible that you don't have to buy into that.
Yeah. I haven't looked at how much EV you bleed, but I can't imagine it would be a lot because a lot of the players I'm selecting in my team now, I would be happy if it wasn't even a game week 5 or 6 wildcard, if you know what I mean. They are still top players. There are other times we started a season, you've been like, right, you need 3 players from X team that you don't actually particularly rate, but the fixtures are that good, you have to target them.
Yep.
Whereas I look at my team and I'm like, I'm pretty happy with it. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't if I get to 6-7 and I'm in a decent position and I don't necessarily have to wildcard because a lot of the players might just be good. Like,
yep. No issues there. I might throw up one of the drafts here. I mean, guys, the drafts I've put together here, they're just completely kind of just default kind of solves. Just mainly just have some players that we can maybe talk about. No flair, really, just boring and just some players that we can maybe discuss. That's it. It's just kind of to, I suppose, inspire some sort of intelligent conversation that we might hope to have.
Good luck. Good luck with that.
But yeah, again, the players here at the same price points could be changed for anyone. There's a 6.5 million mid. It's mainly to look at the big change between a Salah draft and a Haaland draft. I guess that's a big decision people need to figure out. I know before when the game first launched and we first got the prices, I think most people were in the mind Haaland's too expensive. And Salah's going to be a Salah only draft or something like that. That's not really turned out to be the case in the end. Again, I think as somebody who plays the game in quite an analytical way, I'm completely aware of how ignorant I actually am and how small my brain actually is. Initially I thought Salah was good. I was wrong, and that's fine. And I think it's important to be able to recognise that most of the things that we think about football aren't actually really true, and particularly about FPL. Our brains aren't big enough to compute these kind of massive problems over 38 game weeks where there's so many different variables. It turns out a Haaland draft actually quite good. And it's really, really close. I think teams that with both Salah and Haaland are very fragile in that they have really weak benches, 4 mil defenders, and a lot of really cheap players in there that aren't very good.
They are doable though, aren't they? I think that would lend itself to probably a very early wildcard strategy for me if you were going to do it. But yeah,
100%. I think I'd be probably open to it. Yeah, if I was going to be wildcarding in like 3 or 4 or something, I'd be open to the idea because there's less, I suppose, bench depth that you're likely to need.
It goes contrary to what your play style is anyway, and what review would recommend. We know it wants stronger benches, but when we say stronger benches, it doesn't necessarily mean in value, right? At the end of the day, some of these players that probably would be on the bench in that scenario, like your Barcos, your Rodgers, stuff like that, if they end up just being very good picks, then the price isn't really relevant in that sense. It's the strength of the player in terms of the expected points. Someone's Curiosity's put, I've got Gvardiol on the pod, that's sick. Yeah, I've got my connections, man. I brought him in. The Croatian/Irish accent.
Unfortunately, I'm not left wing this season, though. I'm getting locked up back in the back 3.
Jackie Boy Grealish is going crazy instead.
Just a draft like this again. I think players that kind of surprised me in terms of their EV to start the season, and players that I'll almost definitely be owning. I suppose one that stood out to me big time was actually Pedro Porro. It makes sense. He has put up a lot of high numbers over the last couple of seasons in terms of expected goal involvement, but I think just intuitively we think, Spurs, whatever, high line, they're going to concede a lot of goals and things like that, but he's actually quite highly rated in terms of expected points, and if things don't change, he's one that's quite likely to be in. I think Eze, no matter how you play the game, everybody
bring up the if you can bring up the draft in the background, mate, because it's got some of those names in there, hasn't there?
Here we go.
Yeah, the Porro one did surprise me a little bit as well. I'll add, but at the same time, I'm just a massive fan of Porro. I think he's great, and I know Spurs' data wasn't all that, and sometimes it was calamitous, but I do think there is the amount of variance. There's a lot of variance that goes into clean sheets. You look at Man City for seasons on end; they've just been like the best defence, or at least one or two for multiple seasons, and they just end up shipping those 1 goals and stuff, and sometimes it's just like bad luck. You look at Man United with terrible data and you end up with like 10, 11, 12 clean sheets or what it is, and obviously it does correlate, but there is some variance there. So I think if the fixtures are good and the player is good, which Porro certainly is,
Yeah.
I'm happy to take the chance, really.
Yeah, 100%.
And I know a lot of the talk sort of before the game was really properly released and maybe just at the beginning stages was about obviously these bonus points losses. And I appreciate that Porro is one of the people that probably will be victim to that. But the change is still quite small overall, isn't it? In the sense that, yes, he might not get the bonus in like a game where it's 3-1 and he ended up getting the assist for the goal and he got 1 or 2 bonus. But you're not probably losing that much bonus overall. And if anything, if it's stripping down bonus for defenders, you're back to those basics of clean sheets, assist, goals. Well, yes, Spurs might not tick all the boxes in clean sheets, but Porro is one of the top in terms of assists and goals for a defender, definitely. So, given that price and the fixtures, the value is there. So, yeah, I saw a lot of people being a bit sort of turn their nose up at that one, but I think Porro probably have to be in for me as well as it stands.
I've actually seen Udogi's EV is actually quite high as well. I've had quite a few solves with him with both defenders in.
I think there was times where Porro was more reserved and Udogi seemed to be the one that was bombing forward even more. Right, I think Ange is open to sort of changing which side he wants the fullback to push up more. I know generally he has them both do it, but all the top managers have plans for particular games, don't they? So there is definitely a world where Udogi does very well. I don't think if Porro still takes some set pieces, that's obviously his extra niche, I guess, and he's improved himself in the sense that he can finish goals more readily. So probably worth that 0.5. But Udogi's still a good pick. Yeah, I like him.
I think players, let's say again, this draft is just a quick kind of makeup of some of the players who I've been seeing in solves. I suppose the ones who have been seeing in pretty much everyone and who I'll almost definitely own are Eze. I think no matter how you play the game, everybody's going to have Eze.
I've heard that on every pod as well. No matter whether they're analytics or not, everyone's on Eze, aren't they? It's hard to argue that one.
Yeah, takes pens. He's good, and he's going to do pretty well. Obviously, if he moves, there's something that might change, but we'll worry about that when and if it happens. I think Bruno is somebody who I will own 100% if nothing changes, of course. Not sure if you might not agree with that. I don't know.
I think he's basically pretty much only going to be in the analytical teams. I haven't seen him in any other team. He's in one of my drafts, but not others. So no, I'm not 100% on Bruno.
Yeah, I think. Man United aren't great.
They've got an alright start.
Bruno's pretty good. It takes penalties.
I think with the price point though, although that 8.5, it's like that. Although this team doesn't have Haaland, generally it's like Bruno or Salah. I was finding as long as if you wanted to go with Saka, and obviously the one which has got Salah would end up having not having Haaland, and Haaland would be in the one with Bruno. That's the kind of trade-off I've seen a lot of the time. I think Odegaard at 8.5 is fine as well, right, at that sort of price. But I don't really think there's too many others. But the beauty of both of those players is they just play pretty much every game. They both play pretty much every minute. Yep. Obviously, Bruno's got those penalties, so
that's it. Yeah, exactly. One of them takes the penalties and one doesn't. And that's pretty much it, really. Like they're both going to do really well. Odegaard's a great pick, and I've actually seen him in a lot of solves. So say this team here that I have up at the moment, actually a much more common kind of output might be that the Solanke in there would actually be João Pedro. I didn't put him in here just for whatever reason, but João Pedro really good if the minutes are there when we get to game week 1, and if they are there, 100% I'll own João Pedro if he looks like his minutes are going to be pretty good. We'll get into X-Mins and stuff later on, but yeah, he might be downgraded, and then the Garnacho pick at 6.5 would be upgraded to Odegaard. Really, really common team, and if João Pedro was to be fit, this would be a really kind of quite likely team that I might look at with those two changes in there.
Lots of 4.5s, aren't there? If Burn's not, there's plenty you could go with there. If Burn, for whatever reason, isn't nailed. I mean, he probably
exactly.
is. But,
Duncan.
Garnacho as well. I mean, Brennan Johnson to start the season looks great to me. I think he'd be my pick if anything. But it's funny actually. Initially, when the game launched, I thought the 6.5s had a lot of options, and I think for some reason they seem to have dwindled in my mind. And it's like they're not quite as good as I thought. But obviously, you've got Morgan Gibbs-White, who's an analytical target, and if all else fails, Penn set piece is probably going to play.
Yeah,
I know there's been talk of other people taking some set pieces from him, but he should be fine, right?
Yeah. I have a team here with Haaland in it that has in there, so I'll just change that over to this here. And as you see, this one with Haaland, again, slight change. Obviously, Salah drops out. I've changed the 6.5s in here just to, again, just show some of the other players that we might want to talk about. But again, all the 6.5, Johnson, Garnacho, Nkunku's in here if his minutes are good. Gibbs-White is going to be good regardless. Again, all the price points could be kind of changed. I have Andy Robertson at the back. Again, whether he's fit or not, I don't know. We'll find out later. If he is, I think he's going to be really good. Again, just another kind of structure of a team. And you see João Pedro's in here, who again, if the minutes are there, I think he's an unbelievable pick. Any thoughts on this one?
I think this is very close to what I think most people will end up going with. I think the big change maybe you'll see from a lot, and maybe not analytical, would be Isak instead of, say, a Bruno. You'll probably have Isak up front, not have Armstrong, and then maybe a cheaper mid, like I think Hudson-Odoi seems to be popular, or maybe even Pereira.
Andreas if he's on pens.
Yeah, I don't know if that price works out exactly because I haven't worked it out in my head, but it's something like that.
I think so.
Mads is saying in the chat, Son as a placeholder for Saka, rest after the Euros. Yeah, I mean, I don't think Saka will get a rest, but he may do. But Son's fine, I think, to start the season. He's got really good games. So I personally wouldn't do it because I think Saka's EV is pretty damn good. And it's just, we talked about saving the transfers, but I wouldn't be opposed to it. I think it's a good option. I think maybe going Son instead of a Salah and then alongside a Haaland works pretty well. But yeah, sorry, I'm getting distracted. But yeah, those were the main points on that. I think Robertson, the 6 million defender mark, is quite... There's a lot of 6 million defenders, right, in the sense that you've got all the Arsenal ones pretty much that are viable. I think they're still viable despite the bad fixtures, just because how good they were doesn't mean they're going to be, but we think they'll continue to be. You've obviously got Gvardiol, who's very popular, and then, like you say, you've got even Van Dijk from Liverpool. If you didn't want to risk the Robertson situation, I think still a good pick. So I think a 6 million defender looks pretty tasty, and he fits into just about every structure going. So I think a lot of people.
I think just on that as well, a lot of 6 mil defenders. Just I suppose just to mention while we're on it, say a player like Gabriel, he would be in let's say an optimal review draft in my opinion. If you think he's going to play as much as he has in the past. He would be in my team if I thought he was going to play. I'll actually likely be kind of banning him from any of my solves myself.
Do you feel that strongly, do you? Just think the risk is there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he's going to play. Like, I think he's almost definitely going to play every game this season. You know, that's my thoughts. But there is definitely uncertainty there. And there's no world where I'll actually start game week 1 with Gabriel. So I might as well just ban him. I'd go with
I think
Salah,
that's a really good example for people of robust play, though. You might even think that that's the case, and you probably even believe that's the case. Yeah. But because there is an element of doubt, well, let's pick a more robust option. Even to the point where you might end up losing EV, and it might not work out. But overall, I think the general message, right, with the analytical play is, if you pick that option more often than you don't, you'll end up winning more often. It's not always about the individual battle. It's about doing that repeatedly over your decisions over and over and over, and you'll come out on top more often than you won't because you've been more robust essentially, right? Yeah, I think that's admirable. That's good. I really like that. But for me, I'm always inclined to go the other way and go, do you know what? I actually think this player will just do better, so I'm going to risk it. I've calmed that down, but that can obviously lead to more volatile seasons as a result.
What would I do in this draft if João Pedro is unavailable? Yeah, so there are some changes in there. I suppose it could be, again, like Robertson downgraded to upgrade João Pedro. It could be, for example, maybe one of the 6.5 million mids. Let's say Nkunku goes down to maybe Andreas Pereira if he's on pens. Maybe Mavididi at Leicester. I've seen him in quite a lot of solves at 5.5, or Morgan Rogers at Villa at 5 if his minutes are good, in order to kind of I suppose change João Pedro into one of the 6 mil forwards. Probably Muniz is somebody who I've seen in a lot.
Yeah, Robertson to Muniz, right, works, and you got some. Then you've got a lot. You know, you've got Wood, you've got Muniz, like you say, you've got a load of options there, really.
Calvert-Lewin's in there as well. So there are options for selling. Something like that. It's a small change like that. Either Robertson or one of the 6.5 mil mids downgraded. I think everybody else. I think for me, anyways, from my point of view, Bruno, Saka, Eze, Trent, Porro, and Adam Armstrong are the and Konza, I suppose, are the players who I will almost definitely own, presuming nothing major changes. I will probably have a 6.5 million mid. I'll probably have Flecken and the backup keeper. I think the premium goalkeepers are really good, particularly Raya and Allison are both really good. Ederson is great, but just his EV actually isn't as good as I thought it would have been.
There's also still that slight risk he goes, right? So you're taking a bit of a chance by having him.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't think it will happen, but it might. Yeah.
And I suppose just around these two drafts, say in terms of EV, whatever, a Salah draft versus a Haaland draft, they're both virtually identical. Worth noting, just for anybody who's maybe a little bit newer to review, that if you click into one of the individual players, like Salah, for example, because of the rumours around him potentially leaving Liverpool, you'll see where his minutes are underneath that there's an availability percentage, and that's been dropped. It's been lowered a bit to kind of reflect that. Now, thankfully, we're able to actually edit that now and change that back to 1, which means he's available for every game. I think that's really important when you're actually kind of planning and when you're running solves and things like that, because if you think Salah's going to leave, you're not going to buy him. And I suppose back to the idea similar to around the Gabriel situation, where I mentioned there's a small bit of doubt, so I'm not going to buy him. Yeah. Slightly different for Salah, but if when it comes to game week 1, I think that there's any sort of chance of him maybe leaving, that would sway things, and I'd just go with the Haaland draft. So I think it's just important to be aware of things like that. One other thing I would add as well, just while I'm talking about kind of the technical side of things and the numbers and things like that and editing, I think probably the most important thing around review and around just FPL now, the kind of biggest edge that people can have is around the minutes. A question there, is Salah really going? No, I don't think so. I think that there's almost a 0 chance that he does go. But if there is a 1% chance that he goes and you have a 50-50 decision, well, then I'm not going to pick the side that might get screwed over, right? But yeah, just around FPL, I was just saying one of the biggest edges that's available right now are around minutes predictions. And I think it's a really good spot at the moment, because that's anybody that actually includes a lot of football knowledge and being quite engaged with different players and different teams and setups and performances. Because even though performances over a small sample have virtually no impact on the expected points that we might hope to get, it might have an impact on the minutes that we expect players to get. And the default X-mins for players on review, for example, I mean, it's just a person inputting them, right? So review himself will say it's really, really important that you bring your own minutes and kind of, I suppose, collaborate with others and try and find kind of.
I do think he does a very good job overall, right, in compared
100%.
to other. Yeah, he's very good. Obviously, he's able to factor in all the other things that people don't consider, like cameo appearances. You name it, meteorite landing on someone's house. Like he beds it all in. Yeah,
no, it's a brilliant base. But he'll say himself as well, do bring your own. And kind of that's where you can reflect your own kind of feelings around players and teams and kind of setups. On
that note, I just want to add something I do, and I don't know because I'm not the best analytical manager and I'm still learning, but something I do tend to do is I have gone through and sort of put everyone in the game's minutes up to like 95 just to see, were everyone to play every single minute, who are the best options value-wise, and then I can look and sort of see, okay, so if this player gets more minutes than is anticipated currently on the default, and I agree with that, then this player could be an undercover gem. And there's some players like, for example, Rodgers. If you think Rodgers is going to play more minutes than is expected, and he's up to 90 and he's cost 5 million, there's no way the kid's not going to be value, right? Yeah. He might not be the best pick in the game in terms of actual points, but points per million, he's going to be really good. So yeah, that's something I do and I like to look at. Obviously, it's important not to get fixated with that, because even the very best players who play every minute in our mind, like the Brunos and the Salahs, they don't play everyone, and they can't account for stuff that random injury or whatever else is built into it, like I said. So yeah, but it's just a fun exercise, I think, to see what the kind of true EV could be of these players.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a kind of a space for that in quite close decisions, maybe on captaincy or something. Again, when you have a 50-50 decision, the way that you decide what to do with it and how to figure out which way to go, it doesn't matter, because it's a 50-50 decision, right? Some people like to base it on which player they prefer. Some people like to base it on, like that. If they overperform what I expect their minutes to be, which one is going to be better. If they do play the full game, maybe another player gets injured and Rodgers ends up playing 95 minutes, or maybe he just plays 95 minutes, which is likely to happen in any one game week. You know, it could happen. So yeah, I definitely agree. In like close calls over like a large scale, over like every player in the game, it might not be super useful, but I don't think that it's kind of to be dismissed either.
No.
Again, don't see any issue with it. I think it's important to note as well, I'm also not the best manager or anywhere near to it in terms of analytical play. I'm just a dude,
just a boy
clicking some buttons, just clicking.
Just innocent man.
Yeah, just a humble servant of the EV.
Yeah. I was going to say something there and I totally lost my trail of thought.
Might come back. I might just pop up here as well. We have another member of, I suppose, the analytics community. It came to you?
It came to me. It is important though, I think, and you'll see this a lot, I think, which is hard to steer away from it if you do sort of end up on X and other places, is that just because a player might have high minutes in 1 week and looks to be set in a certain position in 1 week, I just keep banging this drum that these top managers will change their teams around. They've got fantastic squads. You get the leak, this player's starting, and yes, the EV might be there, but in terms of trying to play robustly, it's not always the best decision to then bring them in if you think that might change the next week or the week after or the week after. And there's a number of players in that category, isn't there, where they could play different positions, their minutes could vary all over the place.
Yeah.
And limiting the amount of players you've got of that ilk is probably generally a pretty good idea, I think.
Yeah.
You can play that lottery and get really lucky, but you're more likely not to.
Yeah, I think really good, for me anyways, the best practice is like kind of being very harsh on mins. It's kind of the approach that I've taken and I've seen a lot of good managers do. It's not the only way to approach X-mins. It's definitely it's not the only good way to do it either. There's definitely other methods. But for me, I tend to be quite harsh on minutes to kind of reflect that uncertainty. I mean, players like Bruno, there's no uncertainty to be reflected, which is why he's such a good pick. A player like Nkunku, for example, is in this draft. I mean, we'll talk more about him specifically maybe in a few weeks' time when we have more information. But a player like him, we're not too sure of his minutes. So whatever the kind of consensus is around it, which is probably maybe high 60s at the moment, maybe like 70 minutes, maybe some people think higher, 75 minutes or something. I'm always going to be on kind of towards the bottom of that kind of spread. And kind of being more harsh and happy to be wrong, and if I am and I've missed out on him, that's fine. But just because we think his minutes are going to be 75, I think, oh my god, he's an unbelievable player, he was out injured, he's back, he's scored a few goals in pre-season, he's in form, maybe in 2 weeks' time he's not, and he's also somebody who's really injury prone and things like that. So I tend to err on the side of being too cautious, I suppose.
Maybe not with him, but then I guess so, because they have got a lot of players. But it's also about viable alternatives, right? When you've got players that are great, but I think Brighton are a good example. They've got a lot of good. They've got some what look like great players in Minty and João Pedro and stuff like that. But there are a hell of a lot of options at the club, so it's sort of that scare factor. And Nkunku, Chelsea, they have got a lot of options. Maybe he's a cut above them all. We don't quite know yet. So I think in this team you've got up here, I mean, you could only really point that at, say, João Pedro and Nkunku. I think maybe Robertson as well, just because the new manager, he's got that injury. Is he going to play 100% if he plays an inverted setup and he plays in a left back spot, say, it's like a left centre back spot? They're probably the only three players, unless you could even point out and say, there's some question marks there. Yes, Eze with the transfer, but outside of that, no. And that's probably an acceptable level, right, where one or two in your team at most, you're probably happy to chance, I think. Whereas you start adding players like, your Barcos, you start having Brennan Johnson to this draft as well, maybe instead of Gibbs White, and suddenly you're at the point where it's like, this could go very wrong very quickly. How many times has everyone gone back to their game week 1 squad halfway through the season or at the end of it and looked at it and gone, what the hell was I thinking? It happens every single year for those of us that like to take some of those chances.
I think you touch on a really good point, really important point there around kind of a term that comes up a lot, around risk, and kind of how we view the risk that you take in FPL. For a lot of people, risk might be, I'm willing to take the risk that João Pedro plays more minutes. I'm willing to take the risk that Nkunku plays, or I'm willing to take a risk on a captain that maybe isn't that popular or something like that. From my point of view, or from, I guess, the point of view of kind of the analytical side of the game, risk is we take a completely different approach to that word and that term. I guess whatever word you use for it doesn't really matter, but around the kind of trying to find variability against the field, as in, we use the term free risk, that comes up a lot, which would be maybe around a captaincy decision where we're quite very, very close, 50-50, and neither option is better. Both players, Haaland and Salah, both have 10 EV. Who do I captain? From the point of view of the analytical side of the game, that's where we can enter the kind of realm of risk. Or what's everybody doing? Everybody's captaining Haaland this week because maybe he scored a hat-trick last week or something like that. I'm going to do the one that everybody's not doing. I'm going to go on the opposite side. And that's where we might see risk. In terms of risk around like minutes and things like that, I say that's not really fair because there's a lot of people, again, minutes is not really analytical in itself. It's kind of just, we don't really know, right? Minutes predictions, it's a space where it comes down to your own assessment, really, and maybe the assessment of the people that you speak to. So it's not really fair for me to say take a cautious approach towards X-Mins. That's not true. I do. But around
not everyone does.
Yeah,
but there also is a huge element of luck when it comes to minutes, right? There is a skill in it, no doubt, but there's also what happens in the game. Someone gets injured.
Yeah.
The score goes vastly different, and the setup's not working, so they change it. Literally anything you can think of could affect the minutes of a player. They get a yellow card, and they're being hot-headed. Yep. There's so many variables that even when you try to plan, you could end up just getting unlucky. There's a Champions League game around the next. There's loads of different things I could go for here. Just quickly, Manon said about João Pedro default minutes being on 63. Kind of agree with that, seeing the number of options at Brighton. Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, we don't know right now, right? Again, it's too soon, and he's potentially even picked up a little bit of a niggle. But I think João Pedro is one of those kind of almost an exception to the rule where it's like at that low level minutes, he's still optimal. That's how good he has in terms of his potential. And even with the fixtures not being great. So if it starts to dip below that, then it becomes a problem. One other thing, I posted a tweet actually the other day that, yes, this was under the previous manager, De Zerbi, but João Pedro has extremely high minutes per start. So basically, if he starts the game, I can't remember what it is offhand, but it's
I think like 85
one of the top
or something.
forwards.
Yeah, it was.
It was like 85. Yeah. So that 63 minutes isn't saying we think he's going to get subbed all the time. That's taking an average based on the fact that the bloke's come on for cameos. He's got an injury at the moment. It's got all other factors in there. But what does look good is for Pedro is the fact that when he starts the game, he generally has the stamina to fit and play there. Again, can you then say, okay, but Evan Ferguson was injured at that point. Welbeck was probably injured because he gets injured a lot. It was a different manager. These are all the factors that are going in right that are too much for a human to comprehend sometimes. So hence we look at the solver and we try to do our best to interpret what we think is going to happen with the minutes.
Yeah, I think somebody like João Pedro, again, he's 5.5 million. And it's not the end of the world. I mean, I had him at the start of last season. In game week 1, it was excellent. I think he scored a penalty, and we thought, happy days, here we go. He's arrived, and the minutes are going to be great. And then it was a bit of a disaster, to be honest, in terms of mins. But it was fine, because, say for me, a lot of people maybe started with João Pedro as a key player in their team, because he took pens in pre-season, and we thought, okay, he's a brilliant pick, and I thought so as well. But it's important to try and kind of account for the fact that we could definitely be wrong. And when I was wrong about João Pedro, it wasn't the end of the world because I had a deep bench.
Well, it's what it allows you elsewhere as well, right? Yeah. That's the thing. The player itself doesn't have to. I mean, we all know the way the bonus setup is this season, right? I think cheap strikers in this game for a long time have actually been really, really good value in the sense that even the Pookies of the world, like any striker you can name of, the Luton strikers, whatever, they may anticipate they're going to do really badly. I think Armstrong's one here that a lot of people would say he's been in the Premier League, he's not done it before, blah blah blah. If you're the guy who's going to play hopefully close to most of the minutes, going to play up front, going to be on penalties, even for the very worst teams, you're looking at like sort of 7-8 goals you would be happy with across the season. You probably end up cleaning up a bonus in those games that you score as well because no one else in the team does anything. Yes, the other team could have got bonus by absolutely battering as well, but your goals probably come with bonus. It's very hard not to be value there. Very, very hard not to be value. And particularly this year with these changes where the defenders are probably not going to get any, the goalkeepers aren't going to get any. They're going to be going to the forwards and the midfielders all the time. So I think the two 5.5 million forwards is actually a pretty damn good play as long as these guys will get the minutes. I think they will be incredibly high on solves, and they are. I mean, hence this team right here. Yeah.
I see them that João Pedro is actually back in training, which is good. So, yeah, if his minutes look good, by game week 1, 100% he'll be on my team. I do think it's important to note, say, I agree, the two 5.5s, if they're both fit, I'll almost definitely have both of them, as in Armstrong and João Pedro on my team. It is a little bit fragile. Something goes wrong, there's nowhere to go, because you have both of them. So could be problematic, but they're so cheap that it's not as big of an issue, I think.
And hopefully, because you've been robust everywhere else and you've hopefully built up that free transfer rank, you can carry him on the bench for a couple of weeks. And
like that. I've got Armstrong on the bench game week 1 in this team, for example. If João Pedro isn't looking like his minutes are any good going forward, he can take a seat on the bench. And there's plenty of other players there who can play. Just something to note, I suppose. Where can you go if things go wrong? Kind of being flexible to that. I'm just going to bring up here a graphic from Rob T on Twitter, who again another member of kind of the analytical circles of FPL. And what Rob tends to do is post kind of essentially projected goal involvements. It's down as here from the spread markets. Now, nothing to do with actually gambling or whatever. It's just that these are just other predictions for the goals that players are going to be involved in, right? And yeah, I think it's a really good source of kind of information, particularly around close calls. And this is something that I would use a lot if I have a close call, maybe around captaincy or around different players, whatever that might be. And I just said I'd mention it here, and you'll see Rob's Twitter on handle on the bottom there, Rob T FPL. Really, really useful source of information. Here we have it's kind of a season-long projected goal involvements and assists. Now, it's only a select few players. Not all players have been priced, so they're not all here. There's some that are missing.
The assist market's only been priced for these players, hasn't it? That's what it is, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's definitely like key players missing from this. Nkunku's not up here, whatever else. The other thing to note with this is that it's also contingent on a player appearing 10 times. So, say Reece James, for example, whose goal involvement looks pretty good down at the bottom. That's obviously predicting that he appears at least 10 times in the season.
It's in pipe dreamland.
But I just wanted to mention it because it is a nice kind of source of kind of sense checking at times. Again, most people who play analytically tend to use Review because it is the best EV model out there, most definitely. But there's going to be times where I'm not too sure I agree with a certain number, and this is somewhere that I can kind of sense check myself at times. And kind of and
in a roundabout way, Review's obviously using this data anyway.
It is baked into it. It is baked into it as well. Yeah, like it is in the the different odds, and again you have the odds slider on the website that you can kind of increase or decrease.
More towards it.
Yeah. So I think it's just important to mention. I think, for example, Garnacho's projected goals a lot higher than I actually would have thought they would have been. Projected goal involvements. It's actually fairly highly rated on Review as well. That was one that kind of took me by surprise. And to be honest, when I saw that, that's why I just put him into one of the teams earlier on, just as I thought he might be somebody to mention.
Yeah. To be the same as Rashford, when they're, like we're saying, we're both basing this on the fact that they're playing. That seems high to me, but who are we to question it, right? These are the guys that are very good at their job at making money. So,
to be as high as Eze as well in terms of goals. That's what really caught me, especially for being slightly cheaper.
Indeed, and obviously these adjust when they know who's taking penalties and stuff. Sometimes they have share in them. It's important not to fall in love with these, though, isn't it? When you look at this and go, right, remember, we might be focusing on only 6 weeks, and the fixtures will play a big part. Obviously, this is across the season, and a section of those. I mean, those 33.5 goal involvements for Haaland, you would expect that a smaller amount will come against the tougher teams than they will against the better teams, right? So it's important. But one thing that definitely stood out for me here personally was looking at Salah and Saka. That's the thing that really drew my attention. Is I know Salah's got, I don't know because it's quite small on here, but
18.8
more towards the goals, 18.8, and Saka's got 16.8, so it's like literally 2 goals difference, but it's not the end of the world there. And then the assist is more towards Saka slightly, but the fact that it's 27.5 compared to 28 over a season, and the price difference between them is 2.5 million, just surprised me. I don't know whether that's underrating Salah or that's overrating Saka in my mind. I think potentially overrating Saka, as much as I think he's a fantastic player, but that's something to take note of, right? If you're getting very close to it and it's 2.5 million less, then suddenly when you see these teams, particularly I'm talking to the people who've got Haaland and Salah, Saka as well covers some of those captain days in the early points where he's actually got higher EV than Haaland and Salah. Yep. So to me, I can't really see why you would go Salah and Haaland when you've got Saka and Haaland if you wanted to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would mention around Salah, I think it probably does take into account as well the, I suppose, small uncertainty around him potentially leaving.
Yeah,
don't think it'll happen, but accounting for that, and also accounting for some of the uncertainty around just a new manager and maybe a new system and things like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think Saka's excellent. I think he's just class. A really, really good pick. I think the biggest one for me outside of Garnacho, also Isak, a little bit lower than I thought he would have been.
Yeah, I almost wanted to say, is this basing in the fact that the minutes and the playing the games, but you're telling me it's not doing that. It's basing it for the same for everyone, is it, in terms of their minutes here, or have I got that wrong?
It will consider the actual minutes that they expect them to have, yeah. I think so. I'd have to actually double check with Rob, but yeah, I think slightly a little bit lower than I thought it might have been. Again, the fact that it's over the whole season, it's not of huge importance right now, right? It's kind of, but I mean, nothing really at the moment is of huge importance because we're so early in pre-season. So it's kind of, we're just kind of, I guess, just wetting the whistle a bit and just kind of talking about the different aspects and just kind of having fun with it a bit, I guess. But I do think kind of week by week, these kind of projections can be really, really good and really, really useful as kind of a sense check. Yeah,
it's probably like the only thing I really check on Twitter, to be honest with you, in between weeks and just see, it's almost like a sense checker. Okay, was I kind of in the right ballpark there? A lot of this stuff will be kind of instinctive, but sometimes it's not. Like you said, I wouldn't have had Bruno that high on goals, like personally, but that looks good. I mean, that looks really good. Again, it makes me think, why have I got this almost negative attitude towards Fernandes? Because all the markets disagree with me, and I'm not smart enough to make money off of them, so I'm probably wrong, is the bottom line. IR3000 is saying there about something we talked about that earlier in the stream a little bit. So if you watch it from the start, we went over that just to answer your question, bud.
Cool. Yeah, I know I used these a lot during the Euro fantasy, really because we didn't have kind of as many sources of kind of expected points, so really I had a lot of experience with using these then in particular, kind of week to week, game by game, how the different projections, and kind of for captaincy and things like that. It was a nice little kind of, I suppose, just a little sense check. So I think we might go on to a few kind of questions and things like that maybe we've seen over,
let's do it,
I guess, Twitter for the last few
days. How long have we been going, Adam?
About an hour. Just about an hour. So yeah. We'll start to wrap up in the next few minutes. A couple of questions. If anybody has one in the chat, thoughts on Isak? Isak's class. He's great. Yeah, brilliant.
Great insight.
Yeah, brilliant. Good. Yeah, buy him. Yeah, really good. If a lot of teams have him, a lot of teams don't, but it's really close. Yeah, he's really good. Especially with Wilson injured as well, it makes him that a little bit better.
I agree with what she's saying though, with the 5.5s being so much value. I think having two 5.5s and then maybe a cheaper striker, again, just the strikers are just great value. They're great picks at the top end and they're great picks at the bottom end.
Yeah.
For the few that are viable, if that makes sense. Yeah. They are just some of the best picks in the game.
Yeah, I guess the only opposite to that is because there's only a few, there's less places to go if and when it goes wrong. But yeah, I think Isak ones are good. I probably wouldn't have him with Haaland. The more that I think about it, I would definitely have him in a Salah team though. Yeah, good pick though. So, couple of questions. I suppose the first one, and some of these we've probably covered in some way this evening already. The first one here from Blues: how do we feel about the importance of like not planning specific transfers earlier on? So, for example, you might have one draft that might seem really good with 2 transfers from game week 1 to 5, like booked in, as opposed to, again, trying to build a team that maybe doesn't have any transfers penciled in over the beginning of the season. What do you think?
I think picking the second option, even if it's a slight sacrifice, is probably the better idea. I think there's no problem in having, or I might look at this transfer when I get to that point if I'm in a position to, is fine. But I think at that point you'll have more up to date data. You'll have more idea of the free transfer value in your specific team because of how many you've got left. But I would personally err for the one, let's plan while we can for whatever that wildcard window, if you are doing an early wildcard, or at least to get to the point of saving 5 free transfers. If not, is just like a really good general strategy to go with. I'm aware that there are some double transfers you can do, switching Salah and Haaland, for example, that make it come out higher EV. But how sort of aim to do it without them. If you get to that point in your position where you have the luxury where you could do it, let's see what it rates there. And I don't think there's like, oh, you just can't do it because you have to get to 5 free transfers. Like, you'd have to judge it when you get closer. So yeah, that was a long-winded answer, but I would always prefer the option that doesn't plan in the free transfer, because ultimately you just don't know what's going to happen. You could have so many fires to put out straight away.
Yeah, 100% agree. No issues. Generally, when I'm running a solve, especially for like game week 1, I won't have any transfers penciled in. Yeah, I'll if I solve and I see transfers in game week 2 and 4 and 5 and 6, I'll just disregard it completely, to be honest, and go back and change my settings.
We'll just range the free transfer value, right, and then see what it runs without it, and still picks that same team's a good idea. I think one that I've noticed, for example, Minty coming in when Brighton's fixtures look good. If he's looked good and he looks like he's one of these players who might be a superstar, or he's got potential to be, I get it, but I'll see when we get there, I guess.
Yeah, shout out Simon on him. He could be really good, and if his minutes look good in a few weeks' time, I'll probably buy him. But as of now, I don't know if they will look good, so I probably won't buy him. But he definitely is a player who could end up being really, really good as well, for sure. We had a question from around new managers, I suppose, and new teams, new systems, and how that kind of the question itself is around, well, how does the model, I suppose, impact? How do these changes influence the model? So, these new managers coming in, for example, Liverpool. Is it just noise? What's the change? How does the model react to that? How do we react to that as players? What do we think? Do we dismiss it, or are these actual factors that could influence kind of the EV?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just a bit of backstory on that. That's Mark Southerns that asked me that. He likes models, but at the same time, he's always trying to work out, are they at the point where he's able to trust them fully, essentially. And his question was exactly that. We've just said it, like how much of the model's taking into account a new manager, a new system, stuff like that, unknown quantities. And rather than muddle myself through it, I thought, well, you know what, I'm just going to ask FPL Review. And he gave me like a response as usual, because he's such a great guy. And some of the obvious stuff, right? Like he come back and said, obviously the market does it feed in here. So like these projections we had up earlier, what are the markets saying? Do they think the team overall is going to score more goals? Are they going to concede less? Are they obviously basing that on their algorithms, what they've done on work on that manager, whatever systems they're using, very complex methods, though they'll have a spread available, right, of what they think is going to happen. And that feeds in as an important part of it. So yes, those changes to system will be factored into the EV somewhat. The thing is, as well, it's important to say it's never quite as exaggerated as what some people think. Some people think it's going to make massive differences when we know that if you make a model that volatile to very recent changes, it can cause haywire results. But he acknowledges here with the rest of his response review. So beyond this, at player level, position and context is important in the FPL model. So the more confident we get in pre-season that Slot moves to, say, a 4-2-3-1, the more confidence it can be given in the model. So, for example, if Szoboszlai, who's been a talk of the community, I think, will be picked as an attacking midfielder, sort of playing that number 10 role, and someone like Mo is definitely going to play wide on the right side, then that is likely good news for Szoboszlai and slightly bad news for Mo. We have to, again, caveat slightly. Mo's always played right side and he's always produced great numbers. It's not going to have a massive effect on him. But for Szoboszlai, it might have a pretty good effect on him. So it will. He then goes on to say, while it's tempting for some people to think that this should not be modelled because of uncertainty, so he's gone the other way than Mark, people saying you shouldn't model that because it could cause those crazy results. The reality is not tackling this and not modelling the changes is to accept slightly increased uncertainty. So in other words, he is building that slightly in with the confidence that goes up. And people have this sort of accusation that models don't adjust quick enough. Well, they are doing it, and they will adjust very quickly if that's the case. If you see Szoboszlai's played 10, he plays 10 again, the markets will start going up on him in the background. Review is then factoring into the system where he's playing, and you'll start to see that straight away. So, long answer, but it's happening. Maybe you've got a gut feel that it's just based on the friendlies, it's going to be even better, and you're happy to go there from the start. I don't really see an issue with that personally. If you, like we talked right at the start with the X minutes and the tactical shifts and stuff, if you are very, very confident that's happening, you're happy to back yourself, go ahead. I come back to the whole thing of, for the amount of times you're right on that, there'll probably be more times you're wrong on that. That's what we have to remember.
I think it was really, really insightful, I suppose, response from Review that these things do influence EV. I mean, when I mentioned earlier on that before review came out, we thought Salah's brilliant. He's going to be the one. Haaland's too expensive, and it's not really going to suit to have a team with Haaland in it. Then review came out, and Salah's EV has been dented just a small bit because of the uncertainty. We don't know if he's going to exactly what system's going to be in there, and it's kind of similar to when I mentioned earlier on erring on the side of being slightly too cautious. This change here, and it's changing from a brilliant team and a brilliant manager to probably a brilliant team, right? That's what it's almost definitely still going to be a really good team. Salah's still going to be a really good player, but he might be like 2% worse or 3% worse. He might be 5% worse. I don't know. He could be slightly better, but it's probably less likely that he does better than he did before, and kind of projected better than he did before. So that's kind of why there's a small kind of hindrance in there, and around kind of you mentioned there at the end, that there's more times that maybe you might be wrong than right, and I think that's a really good point as well. I think we mentioned around models and when should we use them and how should we use them, and I want to kind of make the decisions myself and things like that, and that's fine. What I would say is that when there is more change and more uncertainty, that's when our brains just aren't kind of big enough to compute this kind of stuff. And it's easy to be swayed into thinking a certain thing or watching a preseason game.
We start basing it on stuff that's things that stand out. You go, when this manager came in last time, look at Chelsea, it didn't work well. Yeah. It took a while to adjust the system. But the reality is every case is individual, and you can then say, I could throw that back and go, oh well, Glasner joined Crystal Palace and they look like they're world beaters within 3 weeks. Sometimes a manager comes in and it improves the team dramatically. Sometimes it seems to make them worse. But yet the point is you start to build these narratives for yourself, right? Like I've seen a bit of a narrative building that Liverpool won't be as good under Slot as they are as Klopp. We don't know that. We don't know that for sure. Likely, maybe, I suppose, even expected slightly by the fact that there's been maybe a slight dip on them, but it's always not as pronounced as we might think.
Yeah, really
teams don't very often go from like 1st to 20th in the league. I know, again, you'll be able to probably think of an example where a team's been fantastic and then been terrible the next season, but they are not the most commonplace thing that happens.
Yeah, things don't change as quickly as our brains think they do. In any instance, either a team getting better or a player getting better, or a team getting worse or a player getting worse. They don't change as quickly as we would like them to. With Slot, new manager for Liverpool, for example, or new systems in different teams, Chelsea as well, I suppose, new manager, things don't change as quickly as we usually think, and it's important to kind of be patient, I think, and I think that especially in FPL, it's just a numbers game. It's not really that much to do with football itself, really. Lots of players who don't watch any football, who I speak to regularly, who are better than me at the game, and lots of people who don't watch football who I speak to who maybe aren't. It doesn't matter. Like it doesn't really make any difference. People who watch loads of football who are better, people who watch football who are worse. It doesn't really matter. I think it's important just to be patient. We all know who the good players are. No matter how much we watch football, we all know that Salah's going to have a good season. Haaland's going to have a good season, or at least is likely to. But it's more so around, okay, we have these numbers. What strategy are we going to kind of implement into the game, and how are we going to approach this with these numbers? I mean, it's great that we have such kind of intelligent models that can help us to do that. But even if they didn't exist, we'd still take a fairly similar approach to the game. We'd still be quite cautious, still build a robust team. We might have less EV than a model would, right? Or I might have less EV than the review optimal team would if I didn't have access to the expected points. But I still have a fairly robust team. I'd still end up doing pretty well.
Well, it's a great point, because I think that touches on being analytical is kind of just putting a name on it, really. I know there are some more niche things, but really what we're talking about there and what you summed up is some of the best managers of the last 10, 15 years of playing this game before models come along. You listen to any of their videos, it's pretty much the same thing. I play safe, I play patient, I make smart decisions, robust decisions. This is just sort of bracketing, taking it to a new level in other areas, such as like bringing it down to a number, using a stronger bench, maybe just developing the ideas a little bit. But what that rings true with me there, that a good manager is a good manager, and we're all doing this to some extent in the background, whether you realise it or not, like without the help of the model. Yeah,
and I think when it comes down to those minute things around individual player level, like who's going to be the best 6.5 million, or what new player is going to look great or whatever. I'm not going to spend any time thinking about that really. If you like, for example, I had whoever Garnacho in there earlier, and maybe that could be Nkunku or Gibbs White or another player who I haven't even thought of yet, who hasn't even come into my mind yet. I'm not going to spend too much time thinking about that. They're all pretty good. Maybe there's somebody better, and I'll let either the spreads decide that for me. More than likely, I'll let Reviews EV decide that for me because it's the best model that we have, right? But if it wasn't, I would just use the next best thing. And if there's a better one, I'd use. Do you know what I mean? I'm not going to spend too long thinking about that. Rather, I'll spend time thinking about how am I going to take these numbers and import that into my overall strategy for the game.
Yeah, thanks, man. My daughter just come and knocked on my door, so I think it's time for us to try and wrap it up soon as well.
Yeah, sweet. I think we've covered just about everything. I know there's probably some questions that we weren't able to get to. I think the biggest thing going forward would be nice. I think we're hoping to have a bit of a section around those X-Mins I mentioned earlier. Week to week.
Definitely for moving forward. Again, I mean, we'll try to do them as regularly as we can. Now that we've got Swish, that's going to be more possible because he's young and full of spunk, so he's able to do these things more often. Maybe some of I just realised we've probably got some people who are not from England who don't really understand that reference, but. So hopefully that'll happen more often, but it's not always going to be the case, right? That we will take breaks if it's not needed, and one of our plans is to have a regular feature on sort of the expected minutes, because like we said, it's probably the most important factor moving forward. We have got review. We don't want to sit here and bang on about narratives. There's plenty of pods that you can go do that, and I enjoy all those pods as well, I want to add. But we wanted to keep it kind of niche around the analytical side, maybe look at expected minutes each week in a little bit more detail, or at least have a segment on it. That's part of the plan. If you can think of any other segments you think you'd like us to cover moving forward in the pods, rather than just ramble, this is obviously, a game week one or miles before game week one pod, so different kind of conversation topics. But by all means, reach out to us and let us know, and give us feedback on the pod, because it's the first one back for a long time.
Some teething problems, I'm sure. Forgive me. Production quality nowhere near as good as Sam would have had it. Again, I'm just a humble servant of the EV. So just doing my best, but hopefully it was enjoyable anyways. Should be back next week. But stay, I suppose, tuned on the Twitter, where I suppose we'll share any information around that going forward. The plan, I mean, weekly would be nice. Whether, it goes, if there's nothing to talk about, maybe we won't talk about it one week, but weekly would be nice. Probably around the same day or time ish. But again, more information in the future. It was, I suppose, nice to get those teething problems out of the way now, when there's, I suppose, less importance around what we're really doing. It's very early in pre-season. Lots of things will change over the next 3 weeks. But yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in.